Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at the new Infinity ITS Season 17 Seekers. This season looks to be one of the most creative yet, and I'm really excited for this season. So let's jump right into the new ITS packet and see what it has to offer. Alright, so here we are in the new ITS packet, where you can see we have new seasonal rules. So the seasonal rules that are leaving the game from ITS 16.5 is there's no longer border skirmishers, and there's also no longer stealth ops, but the tactical options are still in the game, and we will get to those in just a minute. But first, taking a look at our new rule, Treasure Hunters. During the season, each player can include a Sasha in their army list, and also has to deploy a treasure token at the beginning of the deployment phase, sort of like how you deploy a HVT, has to be at least 4 inches out of your DZ. And Treasure Hunter says, essentially, if you end the game within 8 inches of the opponent's treasure, you can use that to replace one of your HVTs. Sorry, one of your classifieds. Where you can't also replace a classified with a secure HVT, you either secure treasure or you secure the HVT, which can replace one of your classifieds. Now, Treasure Hunters is nice for a couple reasons. The first one is everyone gets a Sasha. So jumping over to Infinity Army, there's 2 profiles for the Sasha. And really you're only ever going to be taking the 8-point one. You've got no reason to hamstring yourself with the 6-point version. And it's got some really nice kit. Besides Booty and Climbing Plus and Specialist Operative, it's going to be a pretty mobile unit. Booty's nice, it can maybe pick up something, maybe not. But Climbing Plus, Specialist Operative means it can actually get quite a lot done with you. But looking down to what they bring in terms of kit, a +1 burst EM grenade on a Fizz 12 really isn't bad, and neither is the Disco Baller. I think the Disco Baller is going to be quite big. It gives any army essentially a little bit of vision control in a pinch, and it's not a bad Disco Baller. BS11 isn't fantastic, but if you get that in a good range man, 1 out of 14, or even just blow 2 on 14s, that's going to be really nice. And those EM grenades, again, we've seen how popular heavy infantry are. Tags are always going to be a problem. So having an option just to shut those off, especially with the splash template, is really, really nice. So the sashes get a bit of a special thing as well. Units can also get treasure from the treasure that you put out, and this can be done only by Sashas. So they can roll up, they don't need to perform a skill roll, and then just grab something from the booty chart, which is pretty cool. So that's the first new rule. I think this is pretty nice and pretty exciting, just as a new way to score points, and a way to kind of give everybody a little bit of vision control is nice as well. So overall, I think this is pretty cool. So if we continue down here, everything here has really stayed the same until we get back to tactical support options, which also really haven't changed. As an overview for this ITS, there are 10 missions and 5 direct action missions, where some missions like Frontline have been put down to direct action. And from my reading, out of the 10 main missions, I think between 6 or 7 of them give you these support options. I'm a little bit disappointed with the support options. You would have heard me have a chat last season, or maybe on Loss of Lieutenant, that there's a lot of kind of kerfuffle that goes along with this, with, at the end of the day, a pretty decent chance to just have these completely cancelled, with the cancel an enemy tactical support option, or the wild card, which can also let you cancel. I think the balance on these is also still a little bit out of whack, with the one just saying you can just succeed on a mission roll during this scenario. If you compare that to someone gets a Blitzen, those two really aren't equivalent. So again, I don't not like the idea of tactical support options, but I was really hoping they would be significantly altered if they were to return. And unfortunately, that's not the case. I think this is a rule that a lot of people are going to forget just because it's not in every mission. And I think it's a rule that a lot of people will also choose to forget, which is somewhat unfortunate. So going down, we've got our first new mission, a Kale interface, and this is sort of a reworked, highly classified or countermeasure style mission where you've got these common classifieds as well as a private classified. So at the beginning of each game round, both you and your opponent flip the top card of your classified decks, and those are the common classifieds in play for that round. And naturally, you want to complete more classifieds than your opponent does. So there are these two common shared classifieds, and if one player gets that classified, you're not locked out from also completing that classified. Um, the big twist here is that essentially this console in the middle can be used to either sort of turn off a classified your opponent has accomplished, or change what classifieds are in the deck. So if we keep going down here, emit a keel interface is the one that can nullify your opponent's common classified that they've achieved. So to do this, you need to have completed a classified that has one of the special symbols, the medkit, the cog, the globe, and the weird little sort of crosshair sort of thing. And after you've done that, you can press this console to cancel a classified that shares a symbol with one of these. Once you've canceled a classified that your opponent has that has one of these symbols, you can then no longer, I guess it's sort of like that symbol's been checked off for your use, and you can't use a same symbol thing to cancel one of those symbols again in a future roll. But if you then get a cog, you can do that, globe, crosshair, etc. And if your opponent's completed the objective, uh, it just goes, nope, sorry, you haven't completed that. But if it's been accomplished by neither player, it just gets discarded by the pool. There is another way to discard things from the pool as well, which is filtering the signal, uh, where it sort of just replaces one of the common classifieds in play. If a player has accomplished that classified, it's kind of they get to keep that with their accomplished stuff. And if neither has accomplished it, you discard it and then you replace the card from the deck. So one thing you could do if you're going really big on a turn is you could complete both the common classifieds. You could then filter the signal and then get a new classified into play. Um, but I think from what it's saying here, redraws a card from their deck. Yeah, I'm not sure if this means you can do it if they've both already been accomplished by you, but if you can, this is a way to go pretty big. So I quite like the design of this. One complaint with these classified style missions has always been that you have very little control out of what comes out of the deck, and you need to hamstring your list building quite a bit to fit in, you know, say an engineer when there's only one classified in the deck that actually needs an engineer. So I think this is a pretty cool way to do it, and I quite like the kind of play with this beacon here as well. Uh, I've always liked countermeasures, so it'll be interesting to see how this goes, sort of compared to countermeasures. But look, as you can see, zero tactical support options. I don't think that's great. I think you should either go all in or forget about it. All right, so next one over here we have Beepong, and this one really hasn't changed too much at all. The one big change here is oh, it doesn't look like it has. There is a new rule in some missions. I thought Beepong had it, but it does not. We'll have to kind of get to that a bit later in the video. Next, corporate appropriation. This is sort of a remixed looting and sabotage, where you both have a prototype. So, with these prototypes, you've each got kind of one sitting in your DZ, but interestingly, someone gets to pick whose prototype belongs to who. So before the deployment phase, the player with the second turn decides which prototype belongs to which player. And these are the prototypes here on the deployment zones. So it's interesting in a sense that you could choose to put the enemy's prototype in your DZ, and that's interesting. But I'm not sure how that's really going to play. Uh, so with these prototypes, they're kind of like the old looting and sabotage bitty bobs, in that they have, three structure, ARM 6, BTS 6, with an automated defense system. But, and of course, you got panoplies as well, which is pretty interesting. Oh, actually, sorry, no, the panoplies, they are sitting here, and the prototypes are the two ones on the center line. So the way you score points in this is to capture the enemy prototype, uh, have the enemy prototype in your DZ, have your prototype not be captured. But then if your prototype is destroyed, you get 3 points. So this is a bit of an interesting one where essentially you're trying to destroy your own prototype before your opponent can steal it. So you can kind of pick it up like a beacon in a sense. You don't need a skill roll, you just pick it up and then you can run off with it. Um and but you can attack the prototype as well. And you want to attack your own prototype. Uh and you can sort of, it's like a beacon, it always sticks on the table. So there's potential that if your opponent has the prototype, you can just sort of berserk into the prototype next to them, which is pretty funny. Uh and otherwise it, just kind of acts like a prototype. So the prototype can be the target of the engineer special skill or a gizmo kit. So your opponent can repair your prototype, um, if possible. And if the prototype is destroyed, it's completely removed from the table. So the main way you're going to deny your opponent getting your prototype is by killing it, but it can't be attacked in the first game round. So most likely, if you're playing the mission, you want to grab your prototype, you want to grab the enemy prototype, run away with it, and then to get that prototype back, your opponent will have to go after it and destroy it, which is quite interesting. Again, I think this is a very creative mission. I think it's a lot more interesting than looting and sabotage, especially having the panoplies on the DZ edge. I think that sort of pushes people to interact with them a bit more, maybe try and get lucky, and I think that's a lot of fun. Uh, and then, yep, panoplies, just the normal panoply table. Very interesting mission. Now, critical intervention, uh, this is the first sort of attacker defender mission in ITS, where after you roll initiative, the player who takes first turn is the attacker. And you can see the map here is pretty interesting. So, as the attacker, you want to unlock the data console, and as the defender, you want to stop the attacker from unlocking the data console, and then extract the data package, and essentially hold on to it. So I'll explain how the mission works and maybe then go back into scoring. So you've got this little uh, armory room here. You've got the data console in the middle that can spit out the data packet that you want to hold on to, sort of like in supplies. In that room, there are two turrets, and there's a little inhibitor antenna behind the console. So activating the inhibitor antenna as the attacker, you can either make the whip roll to get the data out of the data console easier, because it's a whip -6 to pull it out at the beginning of the game, or you can shut off the two turrets. Now, as the defender, you can press the console to turn on the two turrets, or, and this is a very interesting thing for the defender, you can spend a command token before the deployment phase to either already have activated the turrets, or to just deploy units into the server room directly, which is pretty hilarious. It doesn't require you to already have infiltration or forward deployment or anything. You can just plop a unit in the room. So I could see you putting something like a Lunicod or a Moran inside the room would be really annoying, or even just someone like Shona, who can very easily dodge around and be a big pain. So that's really interesting, and I think that's incredibly interesting. So as you can see, the data console, it's a normal whip -6 roll to extract the data pack. And you can keep repeating it, which is very nice, but you can see with the antenna, you can use it to unlock the data console, which is one of the objective points, and means you don't get that -6 on the whip roll. Uh, or you can activate or deactivate the server room defense system. So going now back to the scoring, it's probably going to make a bit more sense now. If you unlock the data console by pressing that button, you get a point. Extracting the data, you get 2. If you're holding it, you get 2. And if you get that troop back to your DZ, you get another 2 points and dominate the server room at the end for 2 points. That's the same but flipped for the defender, where you want to stop them doing those things, except your points, the points are a little bit shuffled around, where dominating the server room is a bigger deal for you, and then you've both got it classified. I think this is a really cool mission. I think having this attacker defender dynamic is really cool. It's going to be a pretty wild mission, just with everything that's going on and the amount of forward deployment you're going to get just being able to slam a unit into that room. But the attacker's always going to be the one going first, so you can never, just bust out of here and run with something really nasty like an Achilles or something like that, um, before your opponent has a chance to do something about it. So overall, I think this is a really, really cool mission. Uh, and yeah, another really, really cool mission. There's an intel comm as well, but whatever. All right, then crossing lines. This one's another very funky one, where you want to dominate dead zones. So dead zones are these two zones here and here, and you can see the deployment zone's pretty special. So forward deployment and any superior deployment doesn't work in this mission, but you can deploy units in these special deployment zones here. Um, this is going to be pretty interesting. I'm not sure how it's really going to function. I would really be worried as the second player of my opponent just getting to go first, be here, and then just fuck up whatever I've got going on here. So you're probably trying to put, you know, units like Lunicods in your forward deployment zone who can just turtle somewhere, deploy some equipment, be a repeater, be annoying, where, if your opponent's put, a Shona Carano in their deployment zone, that's going to be pretty scary. So I'd going second, I'd be really cautious of just getting alpha struck to the moon, and you're going to have your defense really solid. So it's a pretty simple mission in terms of scoring. You essentially just want to be dominating dead zones at the end of each round. Then at the end of the game, if you dominate both dead zones, you get 2 points. So this may be a mission if you're going first, where you just like totally ignore the mission and just try to massacre someone. If your opponent's got their defenses not quite there, uh, and then there's two little antennas as well. You can get some points by doing that. But really, I think this is going to be like an absolute body mulcher of a mission. I think it's going to be pretty nuts. All right, then evac. It hasn't changed too much, except that HVTs are only worth 1 objective point each now. So there's no real difference between extracting a civilian and a HVT. And your classifieds are worth way more. They're worth up to 4 points in this mission if you can do both. I don't really know how I don't like evac as a mission. Just generally, I'm not gonna. Yeah, I don't like evac as a mission, and I don't think this really helps why I don't like it. But these classifieds are going to be far and away your easiest points in evac, and I sort of wouldn't be surprised if most games of evac are just decided by these classifieds, because really, that's genuinely the easiest points you're going to get in evac. If you've played evac, you know just how order intensive it is to get these civilians and HETs into the meat grinder. So I would really be focusing on these classifieds just as a general strategy. So here we see one of the newer rules is operational learning that pops up in a couple places, which essentially says if you fail a whip roll with a scenario skill, you get bonuses for the next time. So the second consecutive order you fail, you get +3 whip, and then the third roll, you're going to get +6 whip and a special die, as mods are cumulative, and any subsequent order as well. So on your fourth whip roll, you're really guaranteed to get it, and I think this is really nice in missions that do not have a specialist bonus. I think if this is in missions that have a specialist bonus, that's sort of lame because you should be rewarding people for taking the specialists that go well with the mission. But I think in a mission like evac that doesn't have that specialist bonus, actually having operational learning means that there's not, just that luck point of, oh no, I failed all my whip rolls. Because yeah, from what I'm seeing here, it doesn't look like the forward observer bonus has stuck around. So, yeah, so I think it is good that there is a way to not just get absolutely destroyed, just failing whip rolls, as you sometimes do. But I did also like the Forward Observer bonus, so that's a bit sad to see that gone. So overall, I think, yeah, I don't know. I think I maybe prefer ITS 16 evac just because like this is sort of just too hard to be worth it, and this is potentially just too easy. Where if you pull net undermine and telemetry, that's 4 points just in the bag, and that's going to be really difficult for your opponent to come back from. But I really do like the idea of operational learning. I think that's a great little thing to chuck in there. So next up, Hardlock. Uh, this is sort of alluding in sabotage, where you kind of have these consoles, but then also capture and protect, where you want to be controlling the enemy beacon and have the enemy beacon not be controlled by your opponent. So you've got your beacons just sort of outside your deployment zones. You can pick them up without needing a roll, like you would with the normal beacons, and then activating a console. You can just activate consoles. Uh, but the big twist here is you need to have activated a console in order to pick up a beacon. Now, how hard this is going to be, I don't think it's going to be very hard at all. If you have an infiltrating specialist and you're going first, you just, okay, deploy near here, slap it. Now you can make a run for the enemy beacon. I think this is probably the most boring mission out of sort of the new lineup, just as a reworked Capture and Protect. And Capture and Protect was already quite a hard mission. So having it be gated behind these consoles is pretty interesting. But in scoring, these consoles aren't nothing either. So I can see these kind of capture and protect like games really being decided by who's activated these consoles and by the classified objectives. So it's interesting in that sense. But I think with the level of creativity we've seen with these other missions, this one's a bit sort of eh. Last launch, they still don't have my damn credit. I made essentially the prototype of last launch for the Lost Lieutenant mission challenge, and they haven't given me my damn credit since ITS 16. But this one really hasn't changed too much. The big change is uh, you now cannot just launch an Evo hacker for free. Everyone has to have an ID who wants to extract, and this is really good. The strategy for last launch in ITS 16 was just run your baggage bot into the room and send it up, and just kill your opponent from there. So I'm glad that's something CB has identified and has sort of changed on. Because now everyone who wants to launch, they need an ID. So I'm pretty happy about that change. That's closer to what it was in my initial version. Um, but the scoring is quite different. Where essentially extracting stuff is only worth about 4 objective points, but then kind of killing and dominating is worth another 3 objective points, and then 3 classifieds. So it's a mission that wants you to do quite a lot in terms of kind of very varied objectives, which I like and I think is really cool. And it is nice that you still have kind of the majority of points tied up in extracting. But 3 classifieds is pretty hefty, especially with that specialist killing bonus. I think this is the most interesting specialist kills scoring objective we've seen, just because you must have specialists to get ID cards, and you must have specialists to be doing these 3 classifieds. If you're not taking specialists, you're just locking yourself out of 7 points. Uh, where I think there's a lot more pressure in this mission to be bringing those specialists compared to other older missions where, there was a specialist killing bonus, but you didn't feel as much of a need to take those specialists or to heavily compress your specialists in slots. So I very much do like this version of Last Launch. I think it's a decent bit better than ITS 16. And I'm glad it's still here. Uh, for no reason at all. All right, then provisioning. This one's really, really interesting. It's one of the corner deployment missions. We've got this radial deployment and 3 boxes on the center line, and this is essentially your new supplies. So each console contains a box, except the middle one, which contains two. And at the start of the game, you and your opponent both deploy a safe area, which is, it's the smoke grenade or blast template. You chuck that down. And then at the end of the game, you want to have more supply boxes in your own safe area than your adversary. And your safe area has to be somewhere outside of your deployment zone. So what you do is you grab one of these boxes, you take it back to your safe area, and then you can put it down on the ground. But this, but your opponent can still run up and grab your supply boxes. So you probably want to be doing something like, standing somewhere around your supply box, maybe with like a tiger or something small that can dodge into CC. But this is a really, really, really cool mission, and I'm really excited to play it. I think this kind of deployment style is something you see in other games like Malifaux, and it works quite well there. I think just one thing for people making tables, you will want to kind of always be doing that sort of 90-degree tilt on buildings these days, just because of how these deployment zones are going to function. Um, Especially because if you think about a normal deployment zone, you have two options. You can either deploy here or deploy here, where it's sort of unclear to me. I suppose if the objectives are preset, that determines where you can deploy, but if they're not, you've got essentially 4 options for deployment, which is interesting. So the common rules of supply boxes, uh, sort of as they were in supplies, and then this safe area is quite interesting. You've got operational learning here as well, which is quite good. So if you keep failing these whip rolls, you're going to be better and better and better at doing it. One nice thing to note though is that if a supply box is in the safe area, your opponent's going to get a -3 whip roll to pick it up, but they will still get this operational learning bonus, sort of bringing it back up to neutral, and then a bit of extra after that point. But that's on the third roll. You're probably feeling pretty good about that at that point as the opponent. All right, then zone of interest. This is another kind of corner deployment mission, and a very interesting take on area control, where you and your opponent are each putting down these zones of interest, which again are these smoke grenades slash blast templates that you're putting down. The first player puts down the special zone of interest, uh, which is kind of its own point. At the end of each game round, dominate the special zone of interest to get to a point. Where at the end of the game, dominate a zone of interest. Uh, so really, the special zone of interest is the main game for the majority of the first 2 turns, and then the last turn, that's when the other zones of interest go down. So whoever's going first, they put down the special zone of interest, and they're likely going to put it somewhere outside their deployment zone, which means you, as the second player, though you have a significant advantage in the mission, because of having the last word, which has always been powerful in area control, you now sort of you get this benefit in going first of having the special zone be a lot closer to you and a lot easier to defend for you. So I think that's a very interesting point of balance, where these missions, it always felt like if you lose the die roll, you're really not feeling great. So you've got this communication antenna activation, where it's interesting in that it's kind of face to face rolled if your opponent has a hacker in one of their zones of in one of the zones of interest. So what you could do is you could put an interventor in a zone of interest. Then whenever your opponent tries to slap one of the consoles, they have to face a whip roll from your interventor, which I think is a really interesting rule, and a very cool rule, but unfortunately, as always, will prejudice against Ariadna. But I think this is very, very cool. Uh, you get a point at the end of each game round for having the communication antenna be yours, and there's only one communication antenna. So this thing does represent 3 points. And I mean, what I could see being interesting is having some kind of forward deployed hacker in a zone of interest if you're going second. just to face your opponent if they're trying to land the communication antenna, as it does make up a whole 3 points, essentially. This is a really, really interesting mission. And I think, yeah, I don't know. I think this is probably the best take I've seen from CB on an area control mission, just because of how flexible the areas are and the balancing act with the player going first, who's usually the disadvantaged one, getting a lot more beneficial positioning to do with the special zone of interest. So I think this is incredibly creative, very exciting mission. Like it quite a lot, and there is Intelcom as well. So then we get to the direct action missions. We've kept Annihilation, which is the same as before. Battleground is sort of a reworked frontline, and so it's kind of nice to kind of retire these older, more simple missions into direct action. I think it's a really nice touch. Cutthroat's the same. Superiority has now been ported in as kind of a classic quadrant control. So again, a nice kind of older mission that's been retired into direct action. I think that's really cool. Uh, then your last one, you've just got Uplink Center, and then all your Resilience Ops stuff kind of further down here. So my overall take on this ITS season is that I think it's the most creative ITS, at least since I've been playing the game. All the missions, bar a couple, look really fun, look really interesting, and look like a very significant shake-up to the game. I'm a big fan of the seasonal rule in Treasure Hunters, but really not so much in Intelcom. I just wish they would make it mandatory all the time, and change up the balancing a little bit. But we will have to, I don't know, we'll have to maybe wait for next season on that. And Corvus Belli, give me back my uh, give me my credit. Infinity of the Dante wants his credit for last launch. But hey, you can't get everything you want. So thank you all very much for watching. This ITS season is looking really cool, and I'll catch you very soon for another video. Bye bye.